The woman moves quietly through the secret marble-lined tunnel beneath 5th Street in downtown L.A. The only sound is her heels clicking on the cobblestone walkway and their echo bouncing off the walls. She needs a drink to steady her nerves, and finding one during Prohibition requires literally walking underground. She enters the basement speakeasy at the Roslyn Hotel, slips into a back booth, and delicately pulls off her cream-colored gloves. Then the woman slides a sheet of stationery from her chic patent leather handbag. A waiter appears from the shadows, startling her. "What can I get you, madam?" She doesn't even have to think. "Blood and sand, please. Make it a double." As he walks away to fetch her drink, the woman takes out a 14-karat gold fountain pen and begins to write, her cursive precise and elegant. When the waiter returns, she almost smears the ink on the paper trying to cover up its contents. "Here you go, ma'am." The woman takes a long sip. That's better. When she's finished writing, she carefully places the letter inside an envelope and seals it. Now she just has to get it to L.A. District Attorney Thomas Woolwine, the man in charge of the William Desmond Taylor murder case.
We get support from Believe Her, a new true crime podcast from Lemonada and Spiegel and Grau. In September 2017, young mom Nikki Adamando shot and killed her partner, Chris Grover. She was sentenced to 19 years to life in prison for murder. Through rare access to police audio, a month-long trial, conversations with Nikki, and original reporting, journalist Justine Vanderloon lays out the killing, the evidence, and the aftermath. As this 6-part series unfolds, listeners will put together different pieces of a disturbing puzzle. One thing is clear: perception is not reality. Believe Her is a riveting chronicle that grapples with assumptions we make about domestic and sexual violence, the long reach of trauma, and the ways in which survival is criminalized, leaving us shocked at how far people will go to avoid seeing what's right in front of them. Believe Her premieres October 21st. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Wondery's shocking true crime podcast, Over My Dead Body, is back for a 3rd season with a story about corruption, betrayal, and the secrets of a fallen hero. Follow Over My Dead Body, Season 3, Fox Lake, on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now.
From Wondery, I'm Tracy Patton, along with my co-host James Remar. This is Hollywood and Crime, Murder in Hollywoodland. On our last episode in our 6-part series, Hollywood was reeling from the murder of director William Desmond Taylor. But as the LAPD investigated the crime scene, power players in the movie industry were busy covering up evidence. Now, a new lead investigator is on the case, and the clues he finds point to the women in Taylor's life, starting with the director's closest friend. This is episode 2, Mabel.
It's 9 a.m. on February 3rd. District Attorney Thomas Woolwine sits in his den, puffing on his morning cigar. Just 26 hours after director William Desmond Taylor was found murdered. He glances up from the letter on his lap. From his window he can see rows of palm trees dotting the hills of his modest Echo Park neighborhood, and wonders what the view would look like from the governor's mansion. Woolwine's aspirations run far higher than being the DA. He's close to launching his campaign for the governor's race, and the letter he received this morning could break open the biggest case of his career. If he plays this right, his name will be in headlines across the country as the man who solved a sensational Hollywood murder. Not bad for a kid from Tennessee. Woolwine folds the letter and places it in his breast pocket. For his eyes only, the envelope read. It was unsigned. His next steps are crucial. With a case this high profile, he needs to make sure the investigation goes through his office. This morning he plans to share the letter with the lead detective he's handpicked for the job. If all goes according to plan, it could be an open and shut case in a matter of hours, and that will be enough to almost guarantee him the governor's mansion. He takes a satisfied puff from his cigar, and then heads for his office downtown. At 10 a.m., Detective Sergeant Ed King weaves around traffic on his Indian Scout motorcycle, making his way to Thomas Woolwine's office in downtown L.A. He's short, with wire-rimmed glasses, and doesn't look like a cop, or the type of guy who belongs on a bike with a side-valve V-twin engine. But with 18 years on the force, King is one of the LAPD's top investigators. He played a major role in putting serial murderess Louise Pete behind bars in 1920. But he showed his true ingenuity with the kidnapping case of wealthy heiress Gladys Wetherell. The kidnappers made their ransom calls through public phones. He used telephone operators to trace them. Now Woolwine has personally requested King to lead the Taylor investigation. And in L.A., you don't turn down the DA. Plus, a famous person like Taylor getting bumped off is the sort of oyster that King, and pretty much every detective in town, wants to pry open. The secretary ushers King into Woolwine's office. The DA is sitting at a massive oak desk framed by a bookcase crammed floor to ceiling with legal books. It looks like he's sitting for his official portrait, King muses. One would never guess this was the same man known as the fighting prosecutor who once slugged another attorney in the middle of a trial. King lays his files on Woolwine's desk, adjusts his glasses, and then quickly runs down what he knows. The coroner pulled a single soft-nosed .38 caliber bullet out of Taylor's neck during the autopsy. The bullet was from an older model revolver from the previous century. Based on the position of the entry wound, police believe the director had been sitting at his desk when the killer or killers confronted him. Taylor then stood up and was shot under his left arm. From the angle of the wound, he most likely had his arms raised above his head. King tells Woolwine he doesn't think it's a stick-up. The district attorney agrees. The valet told the cops that nothing of value was taken. No locks were forced. Robbery was clearly not the motive. King tells Woolwine the squad discovered the big-time director had a lot of secrets. No real surprise in a town filled with them. But Taylor isn't even his name. It's William Dean Tanner, and he has an ex-wife and daughter back in New York. He tells the DA that the wife isn't a suspect. She's still back east and happily remarried. She hasn't left the state in years. Some of the guys downtown like Edward Sands for the murder, he says. Sands is Taylor's former valet and cook. The two met at the famous Players Commissary where Sands cooked for the movie crews. Taylor enjoyed his bland cooking and lured him away to work for him. Sands is an odd duck, short bow legs and beady eyes, but Taylor didn't seem to mind. He even allowed his new valet to move in. As a way of thanks, Sands badged up Taylor's prize McFarlane when he was out of town, and then fled with 7 of his custom suits and a $4,500 forged check. Taylor reported it to the cops, who then put out a felony warrant for his arrest. But so far no one knows where he is. King is going to speak with Taylor's ex-driver, who was a pal of Sands. Maybe the downtown guys are right. Woolwine asks King point blank, "So what do you think? Did Sands do it?" King doesn't think so. "I think the killing was impulsive and reactive. Maybe revenge or jealousy. To me, it reads as a crime of passion." "Just what sort of passion?" Woolwine asks. "I'm not sure yet, but the press are having a field day." Reporters have painted Taylor as a womanizer, lurid stories about love triangles and famous actresses. "Any of it true?" Woolwine asks the detective. King tells him it's too early to know. Taylor has a shady past, and he kept the company of a lot of women, including Mabel Normand and Mary Miles Minter. We've already had someone over to Ms. Normand's yesterday. Nothing shook out. We've yet to get a face-to-face with the lovely Miss Minter. King notices Woolwine's expression shift. There's no need to question Miss Minter at this point. The mention of Minter has clearly gotten under the DA's skin, so the detective chooses his next words carefully. "I just want to make sure we're covering all the bases. I think you'd want to get to her before the newshounds do. Do yourself a favor, detective. Don't do my thinking for me." Then he slides a letter across his desk. Maybe this will help to narrow the field. King opens the envelope and starts to read. The letter suggests the DA will find a .38 caliber pearl-handled revolver, the same caliber gun that killed Taylor, in the basement of a building at 7th and Vermont. No signature, but from the neat cursive looks like a woman wrote this, a woman of refinement. And King knows the address. It's the same one from yesterday's police report. The home of Mabel Normand, the last person to see Taylor alive. "Check it out," Woolwine says. "Remember, I need to bring an ironclad case to a jury. And one more thing. Everything goes through me." King nods. He gathers the letter in his files. As he heads for the door, Woolwine calls out in his southern drawl, "Detective, bring me the killer."
Mabel never dreamed what a wild ride she was in for when she followed comedy director Max Sennett out to Hollywood in 1912. She was supposed to act in his films, but she fell for the big lug hard. He was a handsome 6'2", but it was that goofy hat he wore that got her, and they worked well together. She was in love with Sennett, but her true passion became the fledgling movie business. She convinced Sennett to let her direct and star in her own movies for Keystone Pictures. She even did her own stunts. Then later, she flirted with reporters who were always hounding her for a quote. "Why have I never been killed?" "Well, I have been. Don't you read the Los Angeles papers?" When Sennett paired her with a cocky young actor named Charlie Chaplin, it was Mabel who sat Chaplin down and schooled him in the ways of the moving pictures and making nice with everyone on set. They spent hours talking about their dreams and ways for Chaplin to mold and shape a character he was creating called the Little Tramp. Sometimes they would sneak off the lot without Sennett knowing, ordering the set driver to take them on joyrides. "The drivers love me," she'd exclaim. It was true. Everybody loved Mabel. The press even crowned her the queen of comedy. Mabel was known as a good-time girl, and for good reason. She never met a gin martini she didn't like. She even had her own monogrammed Cartier flask so she could slip gin into her coffee and sip it on the set. She smoked Turkish cigarettes through a pearl diamond-studded holder. She rarely turned down a chance to try something new, and by 1913, that included drugs. Opium and cocaine were her favorites, and readily available on every set if you knew who to ask. Life was a party. When press hounds asked for yet another quote, she jauntily quipped, "Just say I like to pinch babies and twist their legs and get drunk." Sennett had hit the jackpot with this joyful and smart comedy talent, and by September 1915, the two were engaged. But their passionate relationship was filled with fights, big ones. Shortly before they were going to tie the knot, Mabel found Sennett in bed with her close friend, actress Mae Bush. The two women came to blows. It was reported Mae grabbed the nearest vase and bashed Mabel on the head, who landed in the hospital with a serious concussion. Drugs like opium and cocaine helped to dull the pain. But those weren't the only hits she took. The newspapers had a field day painting her as the jealous, spurned lover. Mabel spent much of her time recuperating and lamenting with her good friends Minna and Fatty Arbuckle. Suddenly, life didn't seem as much fun anymore.
Sergeant Jesse Wynn feels like he's processing Taylor's apartment in a sea of vultures. Yesterday, the place was overrun with reporters and Hollywood people. Today, anyone who stands to gain promotion is going over the place with a fine-tooth comb. The LAPD, the Sheriff's Department, and the boys from the DA's office in their fancy suits. Wynn is the tallest guy on the flying squad, LAPD's elite crime unit, and his guys are still trying to lift prints throughout the apartment. But he doesn't hold out much hope they'll find anything useful, considering half of the movie colony went through the joint first. Wynn takes another look at Taylor's ledger. This morning his team talked to Taylor's accountant, but she wasn't able to shed any light on all the checks made out to cash. Altogether, it added up to more than $2,500, which was a lot of dough to be throwing around. Some of the guys were speculating Taylor was being blackmailed, but it's next to impossible to prove. You can't track down a cash check that doesn't have a pay-to name. Wynn looks up to see Ed King walking, helmet and goggles in hand. Wynn has known the detective for years. He respects King's work, but he thinks King relies too much on his brain, when a good backhand will get you what you need and twice as fast. Wynn yells out, "Don't tell me they assigned you to this three-ring circus." King grins. "You could say that. Woolwine has me handling his investigation. I could use another man. You interested?" Wynn knows the DA's probably given King wide authority. He and King could actually get real work done while the knuckleheads from different departments duke it out with each other for the scraps. He doesn't think twice about his answer. He's in. "Saddle up," King tells him. "Where to?" "Mabel Normand's house. We have a new lead, and it points to a possible murder weapon." Wynn isn't surprised. He interviewed Normand yesterday and thought she was holding something back. "What are we waiting for?" Wynn says. "I'll race you there." Mabel Normand lies in her bed, hiding under the sheets when her housekeeper swoops in. "You gotta get up, miss," her voice boomed. "The policemen are back." She flings open the curtain on the infernal Los Angeles sunshine. Mabel covers her face. The last thing she wants to see is the sun. Or cops. Her eyes are puffy from crying all night, and she'd like to stay in bed all day. Or all year. But she can't. "I suppose I have no choice. Which pound of flesh do you suppose I should offer up this time?" Mabel wants to greet the cops in her satin pajamas just to see the look on their serious faces, but she can already picture the headlines. Mabel Normand in nightclothes for police grilling. Instead, she slips into a wool day dress, throws on a string of pearls, and regally walks out to her sitting room. That brute Sergeant Wynn is back, still stony-faced as ever. The other cop introduces himself as Detective Sergeant King. "We'd like your permission to search the premises, Miss Normand," he says, "from cellar to attic." She asks King what they're looking for, but he tells her he's not at liberty to say. She defiantly steps back to let them through. "Do as you please. I don't care." The detectives methodically begin going through every room in the house, starting in the basement. Mabel drops onto the couch to wait, clutching a brocade pillow to her chest. 20 minutes later, Sergeant Wynn's voice echoes through the house. "I found it! Wait, I found two of them!" He steps out of Mabel's bedroom, holding two loaded revolvers.
Murder in Hollywoodland highlights a major Hollywood scandal of the 1920s. Wondery's American Scandal shines a light on many other scandals that have plagued the U.S., such as Enron and the Hari Krishna murders. From corrupt businessmen to celebrities with dark secrets, American Scandal takes you behind the scenes of scandals that have defined the darker parts of America's history. Stay tuned to the end of this episode to hear a preview of American Scandal. And while you're at it, check out the newest season about the Boston College gambling scheme today. In the small town of Fox Lake, Illinois, Joe Glinowitz was a hometown hero and a 30-year veteran of the local police department. On September 1st, 2015, just 1 month from retirement, he was found dead outside of an abandoned cement plant, shot in the chest twice at close range. While the town and Joe's family mourned his passing, hundreds of police officers launched a manhunt to find his killer. After weeks of searching, the lead investigator discovered chilling secrets about Joe, the local police department, and the village of Fox Lake. Secrets that, once uncovered, would put the town in the national spotlight and haunt them for years to come. Wondery's shocking true crime podcast, Over My Dead Body, is back for a third season with a story about corruption, betrayal, and the secrets of a fallen hero. Follow Over My Dead Body Season 3 Fox Lake on Apple Podcasts, or you can listen early and ad-free by subscribing to Wondery Plus in Apple Podcasts or the Wondery app. Mabel Normand had a pounding headache, and for once it didn't have anything to do with being tight or high. It was July 1915. Mabel had spent the last few weeks recovering from the incident, as the press was calling it, and this was her first time back on the lot. She reached for the bandage on her head and then adjusted her hat. It's not that she cared if people saw it. She didn't care what any of them thought, but darn, it itches. As she walked into Keystone Pictures, Max Sennett's secretary took one look at her and nearly fainted. Mabel couldn't care less. She had something to take care of. She pushed open the door to Max Sennett's office. As soon as she entered, Sennett arranged his face into a big, forced smile. He got up from his chair and tried to kiss her, but she turned her cheek. "Oh, baby," he said. "I'm so glad you're okay. What a row." As always, his hair was slicked down, parted on the right, his dark eyes twinkling beneath bushy brows set far apart on his head. It was funny how much Mabel used to look forward to seeing that face, but now she loathed it. That's what happens when you find your fiancé in bed with your so-called best friend. "You look good, baby." Sennett's voice sounded like his collar was on too tight. Good, she thought. Let the louse squirm. "I spoke to the production people. Everybody is happy to wait until you're fully healed before we get back to shooting." Is he serious? "I'm leaving Keystone," she said. I have more offers than you can shake a stick at. Sennett looked like a buzzard about to take flight. Oh, baby, let's talk about this. No need to do anything rash. Let me make it up to you. Sure, I'll stay, she said, and watched his smile come back. She savored the moment of control before she dropped her bomb. I'll stay on one condition. I want $500 a week. That was double her salary, the price of his infidelity if he wanted to keep his lead money-making actress. But she wasn't done. And I want my own production company. She waited and watched as his eyeballs shifted up to the left, thinking, weighing. Finally, he said, the raise I can do, but the production company, it's non-negotiable. Take it or leave it. Or I'm accepting the offer from Sam Goldwyn. God, she was enjoying this, even with her head still throbbing. Okay, it's done, he said. I don't want to lose you. Mabel allowed herself the tiniest of smiles as she walked out of the office and into the glaring LA sunshine. She was finally getting a chance to control her own fate. She didn't need a man to make her mark in this business. The Mabel Normand Film Company had a nice ring to it.
King lets out a low whistle. One of the two guns Sergeant Wynn is holding in his hands could very well be the murder weapon everyone is looking for in the Taylor murder. They were in a drawer in her bedroom, Wynn shrugs. Not exactly hidden. King takes out his handkerchief and looks them over closely, then shakes his head and instructs Wynn to put them back. The bullet that killed Taylor was from a .38 caliber revolver. Mabel Normand's revolvers are .25 caliber. Neither of them are the murder weapon. Woolwine won't be happy about it, but you gotta take the facts as they come. When the detectives walk back to the sitting room, they see Mabel Normand on the couch, quietly crying, her face in her hands. King's not much for going to the movies, but he knows she's supposed to be funny. Her tears make him inexplicably sad. He hates to see a woman cry, but he's got a job to do. Sorry to have disturbed you, Miss Normand. We got a tip that the murder weapon was in your home, but neither of your guns match up. My condolences. He tips his hat, and they let themselves out. Outside, an army of reporters lay in wait. It never ceases to amaze King that the press always seems to know the cops' every move just seconds after they know it themselves. King looks at Wynn, who nods, then heads to his motorcycle to file the report. It's King's job to deal with the press. Tell us what's new, detective, a guy from the LA Examiner shouts. King shrugs. I should be asking you that question. It was true. The press guys were a pain in the ass, but the Hearst hounds sometimes dug up good leads. The days they didn't, they made it up, and that was the problem. The readers believed everything. It's how history is made. Right now, King isn't ready to give up anything until he knows the facts. Not on his first day working for Woolwine, but he might find a use for the press later, so he's got to play nice. Sorry, boys, we're still developing leads, but nothing to report yet. They groan. What about Mabel Normand, one of them yells. What about her? Weren't they cozy, yells another. We heard she was there the night he was murdered. More voices chime in. She was a drug addict. She was jealous of Taylor's other women. Wouldn't be the first time. Didn't Norman get into fisticuffs with Mae Bush over Max Sennett a few years back? She's dangerous, all right. King holds up his hands to quiet them. On the record, the newshounds get still, like a pack of dogs just before a juicy steak is thrown. Miss Mabel Normand may be beautiful, impulsive, and unfortunate, but I can tell you with no hesitation that all suspicion cast upon her is unjust. A second of silence before the pack starts up again. Is there another suspect? What about Sands? He crashed Taylor's car. The valet, Henry Peavy, was arrested for soliciting men in a Los Angeles park. What about him? Come on, give us a name. But King doesn't give them anything. Instead, he says, I gotta run, boys, and then climbs on his motorcycle and speeds off into the sunset. He has a name in mind, but he's not about to let the cat out of the bag yet. Not until he's sure.
William Taylor opened up the throttle on the Stutz as he hit the empty coastal road south to Long Beach. To his right, the Pacific gleamed against the sky, still white from the morning cloud cover. To the left, green hills, barley, and flowers. Today was a very big day. He had been in LA for 2 years, working nonstop in supporting actor parts and the occasional lead. Captain Alvarez was his breakthrough role. The action-adventure tale got positive reviews and proved to be a moneymaker. But once the kudos died out over his daredevil horse ride across a shaky rope bridge, he was back to square one. He was getting too long in the tooth to play the romantic leading man, which was fine by him. He was ready for bigger things. He wanted to direct. He steered through the oil-rich seaside village of Long Beach, past groups of sunbathers heading for the boardwalk. To the east, dozens of oil field derricks lined the hills like candles. How soon before the movie people outnumbered them? As if on cue, he spotted the huge Balboa Films sign looming over downtown where he was meeting the owners, the Horkheimer brothers. Taylor knew them by reputation, big dreamers who didn't quite have the purse strings to match their ambition, but they somehow got movies made, and they paid their people. That was good enough for him. He was wearing his best suit, light gray slacks and a small checkered blazer. If he was going to convince someone he could direct their movie, he would have to look the part. Taylor had seen Horkheimer's ad 2 weeks ago, wanted a director with experience for a new movie called The Awakening. Taylor liked the sound of it. It felt like a good omen. He had no experience directing, but he had spent hours on sets, watched how directors called camera, talked to actors, and blocked shots. And now he had plenty of friends to go to for advice. Just the other night at the athletic club, he picked seasoned director Alan Dwan's brain about location shooting in the San Gabriel Mountains, and it only cost him 2 bottles of whiskey and a mild hangover. He was ready. When he pulled into the lot, a large man in a 3-piece suit with a cowlick haircut came bounding out to meet him. Mr. Taylor, I presume. The man gripped Taylor's hand in a violent handshake, spitting out his words a mile a minute. Herbert H. Horkheimer at your service. Everybody calls me HH. I know that's a god-darn lot of H's, but what can I say? Taylor straightened up to his full 6 feet and grinned. Pleasure to make your acquaintance, sir. They said you were proper and well-mannered. Doggone it, I like you already. Now, let's find my brother Elwood so we can talk shop. An hour later, Taylor walked back to his car with a new job, film director. For the first time in a long while, he felt like it suited him. Now he would just have to deliver.
On February 5th, Detective King and Sergeant Wynn knock on the door of Arthur Hoyt. Hoyt is a supporting role actor, 50 years old, with dozens of movies under his belt. He and Taylor have been pals for several years, before Taylor transitioned into a director. Hoyt was at the crime scene the previous day. He told one of the uniforms that he knew private things about Taylor. King and Wynn are following up. King and Hoyt take a seat at his small kitchen table, while Wynn leans against the sink. King jumps right in. Just what does Hoyt know about Taylor? Hoyt apologizes. It seems like there's been some mistake. He doesn't have any useful information. The beat cop got it wrong. King isn't convinced. The actor sports a mustache and wears glasses, which he keeps adjusting. It's a nervous habit, King observes. Like the way he keeps touching his head, checking to see if he still has enough hair to cover his receding hairline. He doesn't. Why don't we take our time? You think about it, he says. Hoyt adjusts his glasses some more and insists he has nothing to say. Clearly, the good cop routine isn't working with the jittery actor. King flashes Wynn a look. Time to let the brawn take over. Wynn slams his hand on the table and the sound echoes through the room like thunder. Hoyt jumps back, shielding his face like he's expecting to be smacked. We got him, King thinks. Wynn raises his voice, barking at Hoyt like a drill sergeant. You're hiding something, Arthur. You've got 10 seconds to start yapping before I slam your head on the table instead of my hand. King knows Wynn is bluffing, but Hoyt doesn't. Okay, he says, starting to weep like a 5-year-old boy. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to betray my friend's confidence, but if it would help, I'll talk. And boy, does he talk. He claims Taylor was anxious, depressed, and jumpy the last few weeks before his death. Taylor was a private man, but Hoyt decided to ask him about it. He told me that the dearest, sweetest little girl in the world was in love with him, an actress named Mary Miles Minter. She was more than in love. She was obsessed. Taylor told Hoyt she would show up at his house late at night, threatening to make a scene if he didn't let her in. She made one of her night calls just a few weeks before he died. No matter what he said, her infatuation kept growing, and Taylor didn't know what to do about it. Wynn leans in close to the actor and says, You expect us to believe he wouldn't have taken her up on her offer. Hoyt insists Taylor wasn't like that. He was a good guy, the most generous man in town. But Taylor was worried about Miss Minter. He was worried about what she would do. King pulls Wynn aside. This is a big deal, he whispers to his partner. Miss Minter is now a real suspect. But Wynn is skeptical. He reminds King that no one claimed seeing a woman leave Taylor's house after the time of death. In fact, Faith Healy and her maid claimed they saw a man. Plus, accusing a star as big as she is requires a lot more than what they have. King knows Wynn is right, and he knows Woolwine would probably agree. He's already made it clear he doesn't want them pursuing this line of investigation. But now that King has Miss Minter in his crosshairs, he wants to take his best shot. He just needs to come up with a plan to force Woolwine's hand, one way or another. Back in New York, Adolf Zucker is having a meltdown. He yells for his secretary to get his general manager, Charles Iden, on the phone. William Desmond Taylor, famous player's star director, isn't even in the ground, and the situation is already a disaster. Iden had royally screwed up. First, the papers were blaring stories about William Taylor's secret life, saying he was a thief, a deadbeat, and a womanizer. Some reporters were even floating the theory that Taylor was killed by one of his many women friends, the result of a jealous or spurned affair. Iden tried to stem the tide of sleazy stories by telling the press, I know positively that Bill Taylor was not intimate with any woman. But his statement opened up another more scandalous Pandora's box, that Taylor was homosexual. This morning's papers are filled with lurid tales of Taylor's supposed late-night visits to what they call queer places, opium dens where young men dance in so-called oriental rituals. It's a mess, and exactly what Zucker doesn't want. Salacious press leaving another bad mark on the industry. Iden botched this up, but good. When Iden picks up the phone, Zucker tells him he's catching the first train to Los Angeles. Iden's response is a short, Yes, sir. He wants to say more, but Zucker hates explanations, and he's clearly annoyed. The way Zucker sees it, he pays people like Iden so he doesn't have to go to L.A. To Zucker, New York is the center of everything, and it always will be. But with the fate of the company he built hanging in the balance, maybe the fate of the entire industry, he needs to handle it himself. And he's going to do just that. The press won't know what hit him.
William Desmond Taylor still can't believe he got the job on the Horkheimer brothers picture. He's no longer a supporting player standing in the background. He's a real director, sitting in a canvas chair with his name on the back and a bullhorn at his feet. He was the man in charge. This would be different from his years in New York when he had run his business into the ground and then run away. This time, he was determined to stay and succeed. The directing gig brought him into the orbit of a 21-year-old brunette stunner named Neva Gerber. Since he abandoned his wife, he told himself he wasn't going to get mixed up in romance. But he couldn't help himself. Neva's coquettish gaze could knock a hole right through a man's heart. A year after his first picture was released, the two announced their engagement. But it came with a bit of a hiccup. Neva was still married and couldn't get a divorce. For that matter, so was Taylor. But even if they both divorced, part of him knew he couldn't go through with the marriage. While he adored Neva and her razor-sharp mind, he had learned a lot about himself in the years since New York. He was at his best on his own. While he cherished spending time with Neva, he realized he was happiest when he could retire alone to his bungalow at the end of the day, with his books and the comfort of his own company. He was ready to focus on his work. Directing was giving him options he never had as an actor. He wanted to dive in completely. Romantic relationships took up too much time. His mistress was the movie industry, and the feeling was mutual. In 1915, Flying A Studios hired him to get a big-budget fantasy serial back on track. The original director abandoned ship. The 15-hour series came with an astonishing budget of $800,000, almost unheard of at the time. Taylor dove in and brought in the series on time and on budget, and it went on to become a box office smash. As a token of thanks, the Grateful Film Company gave him a 2-carat diamond ring. More importantly, Taylor was now in demand as a director. He could pick and choose what projects to take, and that's where Taylor surprised the studios. He had little interest in directing big-budget westerns or fantasy spectacles. He wanted to tell stories about ordinary people and their struggles, like Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. Taylor saw himself in characters who struggled to find their place in the world. The studios let him tell those stories, and they delivered at the box office. Unlike most of the self-centered power players in Hollywood, the more powerful Taylor became, the more generosity and patience he showed. He often took on the role of an understanding father, the man anyone could go to for a piece of advice, or a shoulder to lean on. If he didn't have advice, he might offer money, anything to help someone in trouble. He gave the production secretary a huge chunk of cash when she lost her purse. He gifted Neva one of his cars after hers broke down. He bought a young actor a train ticket home so he could attend his mother's funeral. Credit or thanks wasn't the end game. He just wanted to use his good fortune for actual good. His friends thought he was too generous. They worried his open-door policy might backfire someday. People are selfish, they told him. They'll take advantage, especially in Hollywood. He knew they meant well, but Taylor had been in distress plenty in his travels before he came to L.A., and along the way, people had offered him kindnesses that he would never be able to repay. And he wanted to reconcile his present with his past. He had left his life behind to start over and make a difference. This was his path to redemption. Taylor wasn't just walking toward the future. He was running toward it.
The smell of the cramped interrogation room is souring Earl Tiffany's stomach. Who knew that being William Desmond Taylor's ex-chauffeur would land him in an LAPD precinct? The sometime actor, and more often chauffeur, feels this morning's breakfast come back up his throat. He was just finishing his ham and eggs when the cops came by and told him he was wanted for questioning. But he knew they would come for him when he read about Taylor's death. When the door opens, the rush of fresh air from the hallway is a relief. But the two cops who walk in suck the air back out. The short one with the glasses comes in first, but Tiffany can't take his eyes off the tall cop behind him. He looks like he's ready to break heads. They introduce themselves as King and Wynn. "Do you know why you're here?" says King. Tiffany stubs out his cigarette on the side of the table. "Honestly, I don't know how I can help you. Mr. Taylor fired me months ago. We'll get to that later. Why don't we talk about Ed Sands?" Tiffany is ready for this. He kinda liked Sands. The ex-valet was an odd duck, but funny as hell. He spoke with an exaggerated Cockney accent and was always bragging about himself, especially with the ladies. He was always up for mischief. Sands told him when the boss was at the studio, he liked to snoop around through Taylor's personal effects. He invited Tiffany to join him. Tiffany was nervous at first, but then it became a fun little game. And then things got strange. Sands took Tiffany up to Taylor's bedroom one day and showed him some kind of silk nightgown. King interrupts him. "A nightgown? What kind of nightgown?" Tiffany isn't sure. It just looked like something he'd sleep in. But he tells King that Sands was convinced Taylor was having women over and that it belonged to one of them. Honestly, though, Tiffany never understood why Sands was making such a big deal over the garment. Sands went through Taylor's stuff a lot, including his closets and his desk. But I never saw him steal all that money or leave the house with the keys to the McFarlane. Tiffany tells the detectives that the boss blamed him when Sands crashed the car. Then he quickly adds, "Not that I was mad at Mr. Taylor for firing me." Wynn fixes Tiffany with a hard stare. "You think Sands is the type of guy who could kill a man in cold blood?" Tiffany gulps. "Well, the guy once flashed his Colt 45 at me and thought it was funny. Does that sound like a guy who's got all his marbles?" Ed King walks out of the station and checks his watch. It's almost 3:30 p.m., and despite a fine, cold drizzle, the news hounds are amassed outside. Like clockwork, they gather in front of the precinct each day to sniff out leads on the latest cases. It's a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours kind of relationship. King catches the attention of two reporters from the Hearst papers and they saunter over. What's the word, detective? One of them asks. Did Earl Tiffany give it up? King laughs. Can't get anything past you guys. Not that I'm going to comment. Come on, give us something, the reporter pleads. King spreads his arms and shrugs, pausing for effect. Well, one of our guys did find something interesting. A woman's nightgown. They pull out their pens. Who did it belong to? Dunno, but it was pink silk. One of the reporters asks, what do you suppose it means? King shrugs. Fend for yourself, boys. Can't say anything else. The detective walks away, pleased with himself. The pink nightgown is a red herring. He's gambling that they'll turn the tip into a hot news item and throw actress Mary Miles Minter into the saucy story. Then Woolwine might be forced to bring her in for questioning. It isn't far-fetched given her recent histrionics in front of the reporters. Maybe then he'll get a shot to interview Minter, and maybe, just maybe, that'll blow up in the case. Late in the afternoon, Charles Iden carries a box full of Taylor's personal papers back into Taylor's bungalow at Alvarado Court. Before his boss Zucker left New York, he gave him his marching orders. Clean up the mess, and put an end to the stories about Taylor being a homosexual. But to pull off the plan, Iden needs unfettered access to Taylor's apartment. He walks in and greets LAPD Captain David Adams. Adams has been quoted in the press more than anyone else about the investigation. Any idiot can see he's angling to make a career out of this case, so he's the perfect cop to act as Iden's foil. He holds out the box. Hey, Captain, these are the documents we pulled yesterday. I figured you'd want this back. He watches as the cops eagerly rifle through the papers, and he chuckles to himself. They think somewhere in this pile is the key to solving Taylor's murder. They're wrong. When he's sure they're not paying attention, he quietly slips upstairs. He works fast, pulling a sheaf of letters from under his shirt. They're from Mabel Normand to her dear Billy. Iden stuffs them in one of Taylor's boots. It's one place he figures nobody's looked yet. While there's not much in the letters of a scandalous nature, in the hands of the right reporter hungry to break something new, it could help reestablish Taylor's reputation as a ladies' man. Rumors of his so-called homosexuality would be dust in the wind. But he still has one more task to ensure his plan succeeds. He pulls a white lace handkerchief out of his vest pocket and hides it in a book on Taylor's side table. There are 3 embroidered initials on the handkerchief. M.M.M. Iden is satisfied. He knows exactly what the press will make of that. Now for his final errand. A specific request by Zucker. Deliver it directly to the Herald Examiner's reporters, he said. Love letters from Mary Miles Minter that Taylor had saved. It would be a doozy of a scoop, guaranteed to keep the public and the reporters salivating for days. Iden returns downstairs and lets himself out. The cops are still going through Taylor's papers, but he knows there's nothing to find, because the most damning evidence for this case is still locked in a safe at Famous Players Lasky under the orders of Adolf Zucker.
Mabel Normand leaned into the window at the telegraph counter, flashing her big brown eyes at the clerk just to make him blush. She was in a very good mood. The Mabel Normand Film Company may have lasted for only one picture, but her ex-fiancé Max Sennett got his comeuppance. His company, Keystone Pictures, went belly up just as Mabel was putting the finishing touches on her comedic love story. It was about an orphan girl who endures a series of humiliations before finding true love. Mabel knew it was sentimental stuff, but she had a crazy intuition it would be a hit at the box office. There was just one problem. That idiot Sennett didn't own the movie anymore, and there were convoluted issues preventing its release. It was, she thought, the perfectly messy ending to a perfectly awful affair. It was high time she left it and Max Sennett behind. Despite the disappointments, she was feeling giddy. She smiled at the clerk. You ready? Yes, ma'am. She dictated her delicious message. Start work September 1st at Goldwyn Pictures. Stop. Company says I don't look well. Stop. Must rest and go away until then, so I won't be able to peep at you ever again, Mabel. Stop. The clerk looked up at her under his eye shade. Who's it to, ma'am? It's to Mr. Mac, Sennett. Send it with a kick in the arse. The clerk looked startled. Excuse me? You heard me. Of course she knew her request wasn't possible, but she hoped Sennett at least got a paper cut when he opened the envelope. Mabel left the counter and walked back out into the gleaming Central Station terminal. She could hear her train coming in the distance. She was heading east on the Union Pacific coaster. She had a locked and signed contract on her person to work for Sam Goldwyn's new company. He would be paying her $1,000 a week, twice the rate that rat bastard Sennett was paying her. Mabel sensed Goldwyn had designs on more than just her movie-making talent, but the money and the chance to get out of Dodge was worth the risk. She walked confidently toward her train, catching her reflection in one of the windows. She smiled back at it. So much had gone so wrong the last few months, but Mabel was a survivor, and she was doing what she always did. Moving forward. Always forward.
The day after the murder, Detective King arrives at the Hall of Records for another meeting with the district attorney, Thomas Woolwine. As he takes the elevator to the 11th floor, he runs through the evening headlines in his mind. None of the stories specifically mention Mary Miles Minter by name, but the description of the tiny starlet with the blonde curls leaves little doubt she is the mystery woman in the love letters. King's plan seems to be on track. Woolwine will have no choice but to bring the love-struck teenager in for questioning or face public scrutiny. When the elevator doors open, King is surprised to see Woolwine standing outside it. He is even more surprised when Woolwine steps in wearing his coat. "Am I late?" King asks. The DA shakes his head and tells the elevator operator to head to the lobby. He doesn't even turn around to talk to King. "I wanted you to know from me that we are bringing in Mary Miles Minter for questioning tomorrow afternoon." At last, the detective can't wait to see Minter's face when he asks her what she was doing at Taylor's house at midnight 3 weeks ago. But Woolwine quickly quashes that thought. "Pass your questions on to my deputy," he says. "He'll be doing the interview. With me." King is stunned. "You're locking me out of my own case?" Woolwine corrects him. "It's my case. You're too fixated on Minter. Step away and get some perspective." They ride the elevator the rest of the way down in silence. By the time King gets back to his motorcycle, he is already plotting his next move. He isn't the one lacking perspective. Woolwine has the real blind spot. King knows that he is the right person to interview Mary Miles Minter. He just has to get to her first.
On the next episode of Hollywood and Crime's Murder in Hollywoodland, Detective Ed King goes behind the DA's back to pursue actress Mary Miles Minter and her domineering mother as suspects in Taylor's mysterious death. This was episode 2 of 6 of Murder in Hollywoodland from Hollywood and Crime. If you like what you've heard, be sure to tell your friends and fans of true crime. We're counting on you to help us spread the word. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, the Wondery app, or wherever you're listening right now. Join Wondery Plus in the Wondery app to listen ad-free. In the episode notes, you'll find some links and offers from our sponsors. Please support them. Another way you can support the show is by filling out a small survey at Wondery.com/survey. Murder in Hollywoodland was written by Elizabeth Cosin and produced and edited by Loredana Palavoda. Additional editing assistance by Leah Sutherland. Sound design by Kyle Randall. Audio assistance by Sergio Enriquez. Additional audio editing by Marcelino Villalpando. Our consultant is William J. Mann. His book, Tinseltown, Murder, Morphine, and Madness at the Dawn of Hollywood, has a lot more amazing stories about Hollywood and the way the studios operated in the silent era. Executive producers are Marshall Louis, Stephanie Jens, and Hernan Lopez for Wondery. You're about to hear a preview of American Scandal from Wondery. While you're listening, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.
Wondery.
It's a little past midnight on May 22nd, 1986. Steve Bryant walks towards his van on a quiet residential street in West Los Angeles. With his round glasses and soft, kind eyes, Steve could be a UCLA grad student. But the truth is he's a college dropout. While he spent the last 2 years studying and writing, it's not about anything you'd learn in school. He's been living in his van as he crisscrosses the country, trying to get people to listen to his tale of abuse, corruption, and fraud by a worldwide religious organization. It's an explosive story, bursting with salacious details that will blow people's minds if they'll only believe him. And that's the problem. He's talked to reporters, written a book. He's talked to anyone who would listen. But most people dismiss him as a nutcase. And the ones who do believe him, insiders who saw things firsthand, are afraid to speak up. And the ones in power, the ones who know the truth, they want to see him silenced. When he thinks about everything that's happened, all he can do is shake his head. He was in his early 20s when he joined. He was a happy guy. He'd finally found a community where he felt like he really belonged. Now he's 33. Divorced. He's lost custody of his kids. So many battles, and all of them lost. A couple of weeks ago, he finally admitted defeat. The bad guys have won. Now it's time to just let go of the anger, let go of the hurt, and move on. Tomorrow, he'll head up to the bucolic town of Mount Shasta, California, where he has a lead on a job customizing vans. He wants to start over, have a normal life. Tonight was a good night spent with old friends. He didn't have to convince them of anything. They know he's telling the truth. Their conversation was about the future and new beginnings. The message was clear. Move on, Steve. Let it go, and live your life. But he knows he's in danger. That's why he refused his friend's invitation to spend the night at their apartment. The last thing he wants to do is draw them into this mess. He'll park a few blocks away and spend the night in his van. He crawls into the back, lays on his home-built bed, and wraps himself in a blanket. It's after midnight, and he's exhausted, but his mind keeps racing. He closes his eyes, willing sleep to come. But sleep is not cooperating. He throws off the blanket, crawls into the driver's seat, and rolls a joint, chanting softly as he rolls. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Krishna devotees like Steve aren't supposed to do drugs. They aren't supposed to do a lot of things, but some of them do. Some of them do terrible things. And if you speak up and challenge their authority, he shakes his head. Let it go, Steve. You're moving on. New beginnings. As he fires up the joint, there's a tap on his window. He turns and recognizes the face in the shadows immediately. It's not someone he wants to see. Tirta, or Thomas Drescher. Tirta lives in West Virginia, so he should not be here. Not in LA, and certainly not standing next to Steve's van late at night. Maybe it's Steve's mind, playing tricks. He blinks to see if Tirta will disappear. But when he opens his eyes, Tirtha's still there, staring at him. Steve keeps chanting, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Does he still believe in Krishna? After so many years of disappointment, after losing his wife, losing his children, his innocence, part of him still does. And all of him needs Lord Krishna's protection right now. Hare Hare. Tirtha raises his hand. It's holding a .45. Steve leans closer. Hare Rama. To listen to the rest of Episode 1 of the Hare Krishna Murders on American Scandal, click the link in the show description or subscribe to American Scandal and other great podcasts from Wondery on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now.